My name is Leanne Despodes, and I'm the president of the Bailey's Harbor Historical Society. This is our first event of the 2013 summer season, and we're kind of excited to see how it's going to turn out. I think it's going to be a wonderful bunch of stories that we're going to hear. And I'd like to introduce the members of our board of directors. Roy Cole, over here. Susie Baldry. She's yes, that's what we like her to do. Well, she's so good at it. Steve Hay, Christy Pyle, and Mary Moran isn't with us this evening. She's our treasurer. Now, when you come, there are little jobs that we have to ask you to do, as well as what we're doing for you. And one of the big ones is, if you would please sign in for us. I'll just pass it around, and you can, it can go through the crowd. This is important for our records, and it shows anybody that we might want to apply to for support, or financial or otherwise. If they can see we're really serving the community, they're probably going to like us better. So it's an important thing. Okay, you got it, Patty? Yeah. Okay, thank you. The other little bit of work that we have for you, I want to get this out of the way right at the beginning so that we can get into more substantive things, is this is not one of my hats, but we think it's a nice little historic number, and what we use it for is passing the hat. And so we're going to do that following close on your sign-up sheet. So if you're able to, there's also a little hat on the table back there. I know many of you toss some money in there when you came in. We appreciate it so much. And so this will just follow behind the sign-up sheet. And we don't have to rush that way because we've got a long time here to spend. I have to direct you to a few things that are in the back of the room. We do have DVDs available for past programs, and there's even a little order sheet there. If you see a past program that's of interest to you that you'd like to order, we can send that off to Laddie, and he'll forward the DVDs, and we can mail it to you, or you can pick it up, or we can figure out something. They're $15 a piece, and if we have to mail it, we need to add $1 on for the postage, so then they're $16. Also, there are membership forms at the back. If you are interested in joining our society, we would just love to have you. We have 4 levels of membership: $15 for an individual, $25 for a family, $50 for a business, and lifetime membership is $150, which is such a deal. So consider that.
Depends upon how old you are.
Well, and how well you feel, and how well you're feeling. Like if it's a really good day, think about it. Now, if you have questions after the program of Mr. Jensen, we'll have somebody with a microphone.
Lynn volunteered.
Good. Lynn will take a microphone over to you. And if you have a question, please try and wait for the microphone for the benefit of everybody in the auditorium, and also so that we can record your question appropriately. So when the answer comes on the recording, somebody will know what they're answering. That will help a lot too. Oh, and at the end of the program, if you are fit and able, if you can return your chair to the chair rack, that would be very much appreciated. Mrs. Phyllis Zatlin dropped a flyer off with me and asked if I would mention to you that the Jacksonport Historical Society is having a historic cabins walk Monday, August 5th, which is going to be a fundraiser for the Jacksonport Historical Society Museum. Tickets for a donation of $10 for each segment. There are 3. and $25 for all 3 segments. And am I correct, Phyllis, that she is right there? She's right there. This information is on your website, isn't it?
Probably.
Yeah.
More to the point is I have tickets with me. I can stay
Okay.
afterwards as long as people are buying.
Great. Well, we local historical societies are working hard to cooperate with each other, to make just a bigger scene for everybody who loves local history like we do. Oh, and Chris, where are you? I just saw you. Chris Shore asked if she could please point out her organization's posters there.
I don't know if everyone is familiar with the Door County Coastal Byways, but they will be erecting kiosks all around the route, which starts at the 4257 split in Sturgeon Bay, goes all the way up one side and down the other side of the peninsula. And the kiosks are going to be out in front here where the old one is. That'll come down. But the banners up on the wall over here are what will be on the Bailey's Harbor kiosk. The 2 large ones will be back to back and the smaller ones back to back. And the design for the kiosk is over here on the left side. And again, it hits a lot of the history of Bailey's Harbor, so we're happy to be able to include that too.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Now to the business of the evening here. I have a little story. I have a friend, Christy, actually, who offered to lend me copies of a couple of books on the history of commercial fishing in Door County. This is about 2 years ago. And, I like Christy a lot, and I like to be the historical person. And so I said, sure, great. And I'm thinking, commercial fishing, I don't know. But then she did lend them to me, and I sat down with them, and they're just fantastic. They're the kind of books that, you can read a little bit, you can go back to it, you can pick another section, you can reread, you can look for the names of if you're a native, the names of your grandpa, your uncle, your friend's grandpa, all that sort of thing. It's just fun reading. And the stories are, the stories are amazing. Each one seemed more exciting and harrowing than the last one. And I hope that you'll have that same experience listening to, is it okay if I call you Trig or Trig? Would you like that better than Mr. Jensen? I just have that feeling. When you listen to Trig this evening, I think you're going to be transported back a little bit too. Trig grew up on Washington Island. He was raised in a rich Scandinavian heritage. You might kind of tell from that name. He came from a commercial fishing family, and he says the inspiration from his books derives from the memory and spirit of his great-grandparents, his great-grandfathers, Oliver Bjarnason, okay, and Harry Hagen. They were commercial fishermen at Washington Island, and during its zenith, this was like the dominant industry in Door County. Photography, poetry, and history writing is his way of depicting a historic sense of people and place, and a once more bucolic way of life in Door County. His books, Wooden Boats and Iron Men, which is very easy to get backwards when you say, and Through Waves and Gales Come Fishermen's Tales, takes the reader back to the early days of the 20th century to marvel at the bravery and the tenacity of those fishermen. And we have still commercial fishermen, and I sometimes marvel at their bravery and tenacity even today. It's not an easy way to make a living and can be pretty dangerous too. Trig?
All right, good looking crowd. Thank you all for coming. Well, what should we talk about? The weather? I can sum that up in 2 words. It stinks. It's cold. But we'll talk about commercial fishing and the people, the fisher women and the fishermen. It was all, part of a family unit, really. So I grew up in Washington Island, born in '66, so I was around when most of the fishermen were getting out of the business at that time, unfortunately. It was on the wane. But I do recall one of my favorite things as a boy was sneaking down to Jackson Harbor to the fish sheds. And I could hear the fishermen in there, usually in the morning. Late in the evening, there'd be a shore crew in the morning. But when the fishermen came back, they'd be doing their thing, unloading, packing, but the stories were always there. And I just was totally captivated and enthralled by the stories. And that stayed with me until I became a man around 20. I remember being, I think it was, the year was 95. I remember going down to my grandpa's. And we were just sitting around having coffee, and I thought, man, Gramps, I said, wouldn't it be kind of neat just to go around and, I don't know, maybe tape record some of these older people up here, get the stories, and, we're proud of our heritage. And he said, well, yeah, you better do it pretty quick because most of the stories are going to go to the grave with these older, generation, especially fishermen on our side. And I thought, that'd be a neat idea. At least if I could just document it somehow, get the recordings. And I mulled that over for about a year. And, right before I was going to really get this going, I got a call that my grandpa had passed away. And it was, it was sad because I talked to him a little bit, but I never recorded him. And he was the first one I wanted to record because his father was Oliver Bjarnson. He was a commercial fisherman in Washington Island. He had a big fishery. So several years went by, and I was out doing a photo shoot in Jackson Harbor. This is 99, and I saw Jake Ellefson come in the Miss Judy. That was about a year before he got out of the business and sold his rig to Ted Ingebretton. And so I got several shots of Jake coming in. There was a cloud of seagulls hovering over the boat. Jake come in, he got out of his boat, and I sat and talked to him for 2 hours, man. It was just amazing. And I was lucky to have my tape recorder with, and he was, in a sense, my first interview. And in those few hours, he summed up the whole commercial fishery and the history of my place, Washington Island, and some of Door County. And man, I was just like that. I had an epiphany. I thought, man, this is where I want to go with this, the commercial fisherman. And my grandpa said before he passed away, he said, if you do want to do a story and talk to people, talk to the old fishermen. He said they're the most colorful people, and I don't want to say the hardest working because there was a lot of farming on Washington Island too. There you farmed or fished or farmed and fished. But he said, that's our legacy. That's our heritage. But your grandfather, he said, he would, and the fishermen in Washington Island and Door County, when they had to fish in those lean years, when the whitefish were down, they had to fish chubs. And in order to get an ample harvest, you had to fish near the Manitou Islands or Whaleback Shoals, Minneapolis Shoals. Mainly the Manitou Islands, and that was typically a 3.5, 4-hour run. So they had to get down to their boats at about 3 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, and in the old days, the old tugs had the Kallenberg engines. And that was 10, 15 minutes sometimes to get those things fired up and warmed up and load the ice in the boxes, and then they made their run. And this was usually, August through the winter months, depending on ice, and so they would make that run out, get a lift, set back, and then they had to get back. And on Washington Island, most of the fishermen wanted to get those fish packed, ice packed up and shipped out on that last ferry, which is typically around 5 in the evening. And then they would have to go back to the sheds till 7 and, reel nets, dry nets, and prep for the next day. So, for 10, 12 years when the whitefish were down, they fished chubs and they had to make that run. And I'm thinking, my God, you have 3-4 hours of sleep, and it's, on a perfect day, you can make that run out there uneventful, but man, there was times in the fall you get some blows and you get 15, 20, sometimes 25-foot seas. And most fishermen, ironically, couldn't swim. No need to, I guess, if you're going to go over and you're not going to In that cold water, you probably won't survive more than 20 minutes. But Cliff Winiger, I mean, he never could swim. Never worried about it. So, but yeah, and it was, Jake Ellison is a cousin of mine, and he's now 87. Most of these people I interviewed, I'd say over half have passed on. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm glad I started this, I'm going to say, 12 years ago. I started writing my first book. Since then, yeah, I'm going to say over half are no longer with us. They are in here. I was fortunate enough to get the stories. And that was my favorite part of working on this whole project. It became just a wonderful adventure, really. It was sitting around talking to the Fisher families. And once in a while, we'd get, when I get the stories going, I'd ask them for pictures, if they had photos. Some did, some did not. And the ones who did, I mean, then, they would look at that photo and go, oh, yeah, I remember this one time we were out in this particular boat, and then stories had gone sometimes 3 hours. And that was just spectacular. So I think I probably have about 200-300 hours of interviews and stories. And it took 2 years or a year and a half of gathering material, going through archives and interviews, books, anything I could glean information from. So then I ended up with 2 storage bins full of information, papers and then my tapes. So I'm thinking, all right, now what do I do? Where do I start? I guess from the beginning. But I had a lot of information to assimilate, and it took a while, but I started in the winter of 2002 with the writing, and that carried me through for about a year and a half. I think I finished the manuscript 2004, but then there was a lot of editing and changing of things, and it was a daunting task. I mean, a history book is really, it's so, all I can say is daunting. I mean, you really have to watch everything, you got to cite everything. Hopefully you got the right information, because you get different name spellings, different storylines, different stories from different folks. So, but it all came together well, and so after the publishing, and I remember that day in June 18th, when I got the call that I was the proud father of a baby book. It came to fruition, and my publisher said, "Come on over, I got a surprise for you." So he handed me the first book, and he said, "Congratulations." And I'm thinking, wow, it was a wonderful journey. It was so many people have made it possible. I mean, just the fishermen and their families. So what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a brief overview of the commercial fishery. It's called The Living Past. And then Confronting a Dying Future is a little article I wrote for the Door County Today website. And then if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just read some of the stories of the fishermen. I have maybe 10, 12 stories. And if we do have time, I have over 300 pictures. So we should get out of here probably about 12:30 or 1 in the morning. Or should we cut our show? If we had to, I'd like to get through maybe a dozen. Would that be all right? Okay. I started wearing reading glasses last year, so I got to get used to them. There we go. Nice. Commercial fishing is one of the oldest professions known to man. The industry has survived for nearly 200 years on the Great Lakes. Commercial fishermen are living past but confronting an uncertain future. They epitomize the American dream, independent, ambitious, and hardworking. Not only are they fishermen, they are carpenters, navigators, electricians, mechanics, welders, among other things. They did everything. They had to. As one commercial fisherman so eloquently put it, we don't know how to do anything well, but we can do everything. Many of the commercial fishermen were born into the business, passed down from generation to generation. At a young age, they helped at shore duties, eventually accompanying their fathers on the boats, learning the craft firsthand, assimilating into a way of life that proved to challenge one's physical and mental strength. It's not the easiest life, but it's the only life as far as I'm concerned, says one old fisherman. Commercial fishermen on the Great Lakes were still and are a tough lot by any measure of the word, especially the fishermen of the early days. Marvin Weborg and Cliff Winiger, two prominent fishermen in their own right, were known to say years ago they made iron men and wooden boats. Now they make iron boats and wooden men. Being constantly exposed to the elements, fishing is rough, hard work. The day begins very early and usually carries fishermen well into the evening, depending on the season, weather, and what type of fishing they're performing. For the most part, it is a long day that involves physical labor under all kinds of conditions, varying from sunny, calm days to late fall storms and heavy seas, which is a true test to a fisherman's endurance. In addition, a certain skill factor and a little luck play an integral part of it. Experience was really the fisherman's best tool and played a major role in how they fared. Those who spend most of their lives in the lake gained a vast knowledge of where fish were feeding and spawning, lake currents, effective methods of harvest, and basic lake ecology, which gave them a great advantage in a competitive industry. In addition, the success of a fishery depended on a good crew, sound boat, and hardy work ethic. And that's so true. I mean, that they really put their heart and soul into the business, and some really didn't. You know, there was some prosperity in fishing, but sometimes it had to be supplemented with farming, and it was just really hard work. I always say they're tough as an old dog spike, those farmers and fishermen. One fisherman I had a pleasure of talking to was a fisherman who grew up in Ellison Bay, fished out of Algoma in his later years, and then moved to Milwaukee. Alvin Anderson. Some of you may know him as Gabby Anderson. But he was one of my favorite interviews, very colorful person, and he could tell stories for hours. And I do have hours and hours of his stories. Wonderful man. But Alvin Gabby Anderson, a commercial fisherman, talks about the wealth of knowledge and experience that is imperative to a commercial fisherman. He says, a true commercial fisherman has more knowledge. I don't care how much education you have. If you have 2 years, 4 years, or 8 years, it takes common sense and a knowledge of all that's around you. You've got to understand in this business, you can't be taught this in books. It's all experience. And you have to know what's happening all the time in order to understand it. You know, in the old days, all we had was a clock and compass. I had an old alarm clock. There were no fathom meters, radios, navigational aids, or sonar, or now GPS. You'd run into snowstorms, fog, and what have you, and you really had to know where you were by what you knew and what knowledge you gained through experience. You know, I don't care if you were really been out there for 5 years or 35 years, you see something different every time you go out and you keep learning, always learning. There's always something different, but you learn and you don't forget. You store it in your mind, which gives you experience, so when a captain observes or a situation may arise, you can say, I've seen this, I've been through this, I know what to do. A good captain observes everything and you learn from your experience. And you're really never too old to learn. I've been out here for 52 years, and I don't think there was hardly ever a day I haven't seen something or learned something new. It is unbelievable what you can learn. Commercial fishing typically has always been a family-oriented practice handed down from generation to generation. Everyone in the family give their time and effort in the business, whether on their boat or part of the shore crew. It's all teamwork. Hard work, long hours, and dedication are imperative to make a fishery thrive. Wives, sons, and daughters help out on the boat, or as part of the shore crew, packing and mending, packaging fish, and working on equipment. It's definitely a family affair. In order to survive, it takes a strong will and a strong back. And once the business is gone, says one commercial fisherman, you're really never going to get it back. It's family-oriented, and you grow into it, you develop certain things, and once you quit, there's no way back. And really, the overhead, I mean, you just, like anything now, I mean, really, farming or fishing now, it's almost impossible to start anew, unless you were, it was in your family and you have the rigs and everything. So it's unfortunate, really. There was over 400 fisheries at one time in Northern Door. I mean, from Sturgeon Bay, up to Gills Rock and Washington Island. Now, let me see, 5. One on Washington Island. Jeff McDonald fishes part-time. Kenny Coyne is the last of the fishermen up there. Door County, Bailey's Harbor, the Hickey brothers. And I haven't talked to anybody around here, but is there Jay Verley? Is he in the audience? Hey, there he is. How's the fishing going? Not too bad. All right. Jay still fishes, and seasonally, is it or as much as he can? Who else is fishing from? Yeah, right. Sand Bay, you get a few fishermen up there. Charlie Henriksen, Rick Johnson, is he still fishing? Yep. And then Webergs and Gills Rock. So there isn't many left. Still enough to provide whitefish for the whitefish boils, so which is important. Got to have that. Has there been a fish boil yet this season here? Several? No? Pretty soon. I was hoping tonight we could have one. I was all prepared. Next time. So if you ask any fisherman why he chose this profession, you might get a variety of responses. It's all I ever knew. Or my father was a fisherman, as was his father before. A feeling of satisfaction, using your skills and hard work to bring in a good lift. One thing that is a common thread among commercial fishermen is the inner flame that burns in every one of them, consciously or subconsciously. It's a passion toward fishing, working in the great outdoors, and finding solace in nature. I enjoy being able to do a lot of things, says one Door County commercial fisherman. I'm not a professional at anything, but if I have to do something, I can do it. The fact that I'm not a college-educated person, but being able to run a fairly good business is all the satisfaction I need. So, and nowadays it is more business-oriented. You have to have that to really turn a profit. A fisherman is a different type of person. Ask any fisherman and he'll agree. In a sense, you could compare him to a farmer. Both are independent, use the resources for their livelihood, put in a long day, and are not afraid to work hard. But a fisherman finds himself more exposed to the elements and is at the mercy of nature's elements. He's not out there nearly every day and is in it not to get rich by any means. But it's like I said, it's in their blood and it's their way of life, where I live and what I live for. So, with that said, the evolution, it really started in 1850, around here, 1840, and then we had the heyday of the fishery was from 1870 to the turn of the century, and then it just exploded. I mean, it was the lake trout, the native lake trout at that time. I mean, they had just substantial lifts, and then you had the lake herring, and you had this tremendous fishery. The chub fishery had 4, 5, 6 different species of chubs. And just in a mere 50, 60 years with invasive species, when the Welland Canal opened up and the Erie Canal, that was around 1820, and the influx of settlers moving to the area, along came invasive species, more so in the last 70, 80 years. And with that, we had 2 major invasive species that I think really were a detriment to the fishery were the smelt, that were here around 1930s, maybe late 20s, and then the sea lamprey. I mean, they just decimated the lake trout fishery in 15, 20 years. By 1952, it was gone. It was done. You could hardly find a native lake trout. The smelt really depleted the lake herring. You know, they were very aggressive, and they ate a lot of the native lake herring fry, and so by 1962, early 60s, the lake herring were extirpated or gone. And as with the lampreys, not only did they attack the lake trout, but whitefish to a small degree, and some of the chubs. But the lake trout were slow-moving fish and were probably the easiest to prey upon. So, but it really changed the whole dynamic of the fishery, as well as the Conservation Commission turning into the reorganizing under the DNR, with tighter regulations and limited entry and quotas, which were from the mid-70s up to the 80s. So you saw that fishery just kind of dwindle. And it was hard for most of the small fisheries to survive. So here we are today, and confronting a dying future for the fishery. So over the last 150 years, the commercial fishery has dwindled to a mere shadow of what it once was. At the turn of the 20th century, Door County alone boasted over 400 fishermen and was the main industries to many of the communities. All around the shores and lakeside communities, the commercial fishery was important and a viable way of life. The 1800s were better known as the expansive heyday for the fisheries. And in 1870, Lake Michigan employed over 2,000 people with well over 600 fishing boats plying the lake. By 1889, the numbers swelled to over 10,000 and double the number of boats. It was during this 50-year period that fishermen had, in a sense, free will on the Great Lakes. A bounty of fish, no regulations, and lake commerce brought more and more people to the Great Lake regions. However, by 1900, Lake Michigan fishermen were challenged by a number of factors. One which was pollution, called eutrophication, and another challenge was the number of exotic species, which I had mentioned before. So the once great fishery was slowly declining, and by 1930, there was a decline in numbers in 1930 and 42, and by 1960, there were nearly, and I'm talking now some of the fish species that were nearly extinct from Lake Michigan and Huron. This coincided with the non-native smelt that entered Lake Michigan in 1932. The smelt, a small predator fish found to consume small herring fry and spawn, thus leading to a decline in their numbers. Washington Island commercial fisherman Jake Ellison commented, before we got the non-native species, there was a wonderful fishery in Lake Michigan. People started fishing herring with pond nets around 1880, and they had great fishing all through the 1920s. There was never really a failing year. There were at least 120 pond nets set up around Green Bay. Those fish reproduced so well without any outside influence until the darn smelt came along and ate the herring fry by the millions. That's what killed the chubs and the herring in the bay off the west side. Without the doggone non-native species to follow it all up, it was a wonderful fishery. The second species of fish and the most dramatic decline in history was the native lake trout. So, as I mentioned before, there were, at one point, up until 1946, they were averaging, like in 1920, 5.5 million pounds in Lake Michigan in harvest. So once the parasitic lamprey entered Lake Michigan in 1936, the species prospered, really just exploded. So in a mere 10 years, they devastated the native lake trout and preyed upon several other species. The lake trout proved easy prey for the lamprey because of their slow-moving nature in water and thin skin. So by 1952, as I said before, they were gone. So now, mainly you have whitefish, and the chub fishery is almost non-existent. I mean, you can still get a few, but I don't think I'm sure the price is pretty high. But we have whitefish left, and I think more the whitefish have always adapted very well to the changing ecology. Other species did not fare too well, but the whitefish were always highly adaptable. Now you're seeing more of the whitefish in the bay, on the bay side. Some of their food that they feed upon, the krill and these small shrimp, are down, so they're feeding on, if I'm not mistaken, are they feeding on some of the gobies? Zebra mussels too, but someone had mentioned that they're feeding on the gobies, which are an invasive species. So there you go. They're survivors. So what I'd like to do is maybe read some stories of the fishermen. Does anybody have any questions right now?
I do. What causes, when we were young kids here in Valley's Harbor, we would go in front of Barnard's property in our creek and catch all these smelt.
Yeah,
What happened?
I remember that.
What was the demise of the smelt population?
The smelt, since they were introduced here, are cyclical, and there was a big die-off in the late 30s, and then that coincided with the return of the whitefish and the herring. But then, another 10 years, and then then the smelt thrived again, and then there was a die-off again. So right now, I don't think you hardly see a smelt in the tributaries. Usually in April, early May, they come up and spawn. But has anybody fished?
Are there any smelt in any of these creeks? I mean, there were like 5.
Honestly, I haven't seen a.
Creeks that we would go to
Yeah,
and catch
haven't
5
seen any.
gallon buckets, and I wondered, is that just, going to come back someday, or?
They will. I can't be too sure of that, but everything's changing so much in the lake right now. And who knows what it's going to be like in 2-3 years? We're really seeing a lot of things happening out there. Lake levels are down.
Do you think that the introduction of the bigger fish, like the salmon, into the lake had a lot to do with it?
Well, it was beneficial for the sport fishermen, not so much for the commercial fishermen, because it did, the DNR really wanted a strong sport fishery. They wanted to manage that. In turn, they put a lot of restrictions on the commercial fishermen. So one good thing that the salmon did, do you guys remember, probably in the 50s, even in the 70s, the alewife? Remember them just dying? They're massive mass die-offs, and they'd be on the beach rotting. I remember as a kid on Washington Island going down swimming, and usually the water never warmed up there at Schoolhouse Beach, but we always swam, and usually after ice out, didn't bother us any. But yeah, in the summertime, the beaches would be just laden with dead smelt. So the trout did forage or did take care of a lot of the smelt population when they planted those, probably in the late 60s, with the salmon. Yeah.
I did a story last summer for the Pulse about an old fisherman in Jacksonport. He's, I think, 94 now. And he had been a lifelong fisherman, as his father had been. And he said, when the DNR said the trout were just for sports fishermen, there were penalties if commercial fishermen got them. But he said, heck, we'd get some in our nets. What are you going to do, sort through and throw back? Well, he was the one they made an example of. And what was the guy's name, Breedenhagen, that was the sheriff?
Baldy, Breedenhagen, sure.
Arrested him and apologized to him. He said, I've got to take you to jail for 3 days, but I will not put you in a cell. And he let him sit in their lunchroom for 3 days.
I know what you're talking about, yeah. But yeah, it's true. When they started planting the lake trout, they took them off the commercial fishing status because there was no natural reproduction with these transplanted trout. So they were really there for the sport fishery, and then in '68, then they started planting the salmon in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. So there's incidental catch with, commercial fishermen with the gill nets, and you were allowed so much, but there was a whole different method. You were allowed to keep so many, and you had to tag them, but I got a couple stories about that in here. a lot of stuff that happened out there, man. There was, with the Conservation Commission and then the DNR, there was some pretty good, wow, we could say, there wasn't any gunfights, but it's pretty close to that. Some animosity there, but it was hard for the fishermen during that time. I mean, it's having a government entity telling you how much you can make, you know, affecting your livelihood, and saying, or you can't make a living anymore. Sorry. So, but so they were challenged on many fronts, the fishermen. Not only the weather, but the changing ecology of the lake, regulations, restrictions, weather, everything, markets. So the first story I'd like to read is going to, I wonder, well, I got a story. It was, I really want to thank the Hickey brothers for putting up with me hanging out at their fish sheds for almost a year and a half, and asking so many questions. I knew they were probably getting sick of me hanging around, but they indulged me. But Dennis said to me, he said, you know, if you want some credibility, you got to come fishing with us. You know, he said, and this was December, I think it was, when he said that. He said, you come up here in January, February, and I'll take you chub fishing. I said, all right, that'd be cool. That'd be really neat. And so anyway, it was, I think, February, mid-February. I left Green Bay about 5 in the morning. It was a slight northeast wind. It was starting to snow a little bit. So once I got north of Sturgeon Bay, it was blowing pretty well, 15, 20 miles an hour, and the snow was coming down harder. So I got to their fish shed, and then I saw Jeff there in his truck, and it was probably, I don't know, maybe 6:30. I said, well, you guys probably not going out today? He said, oh yeah, it's a normal day. And by that time, it seemed like the wind was blowing a gale. And I said, huh. Well, he said, well, the other guys aren't here yet, but just hang around. And I said, well, I'm going to run up to the point and just maybe take some pictures. Well, that was futile. I mean, I could hardly see 10 feet in front of me with the driving snow. So I turned around, came back, and then everybody showed up. And so Dennis smiled at me. He said, you ready, kid? I said, yeah. It should be pretty fun. So, you know, I grew up around water and been on so many boats. But I stepped into the belly of the fish tug, and they had that big Cat diesel engine in there, and holy crap, man. I mean, that thing's loud, the fumes. So I'm thinking, no. And then we had to, I don't know, there's probably a foot of ice in the harbor. So we had to start busting that, and the boat's just rocking, you know, and grinding. And so it took an hour just to get out 2 miles out to open water. And then, so once we got through the ice, then the boat started going up, and she started rolling. And then we really hit the waves. They're probably 15-foot seas. I don't know, maybe they're 70-foot seas. It didn't matter at that point. But that boat's rolling. And so I'm taking pictures or trying to, and everybody I don't know, I think we're an hour out to the grounds. And so I started taking pictures and feeling pretty good about myself. And then, man, it just hit me. The waves, you know, the waves of nausea. And I'm thinking, never been seasick before. I was pretty proud of the fact. And I go, this is not good. This is a bad feeling. So I just hightailed it to the back and did my business. And the problem is, it just doesn't go away. So I'm in a fetal position in one of their net boxes, and I'm thinking, how am I going to go up and ask them to take me back home? I kept thinking, that Beach Boys song, Sloop John B., this is the worst trip I've ever been on, you know? So I'm thinking. So Dennis come back, and he said, hey, you know, maybe he said, don't feel bad. He said, I had a guy 50 years in the Coast Guard, he went out with me, and he was bragging, and he was saying he's never got seasick. Well, he was seasick in 30 minutes. So but he said, why don't you go up to the pilot house and at least you can see the horizon. So I'm sitting there, I said, well, can you carry me up there? I don't think I can't move, man. I'm thinking, this is bad. So he threw me over his back, his shoulders. No, he didn't do that. I managed to get up there, and it was okay after a while. We got out to the grounds, and they got a lift. But the Southwester Burger-built boat, she rolls. Seaworthy. All those boats are very seaworthy. But man, it's, and talking to some of the fishermen that I interviewed, Harold Greenfeld said, well, you know what? He says, I never do go over being seasick. I'd sit there with a bucket if she rolled a little bit. So he said, I've fished for 60 years with that affliction. So and a lot of fishermen are, or people are just prone to it. I thought I was not. But anyway, that's a good segue to a story called Seasick on the Miss Judy, as told to me by Elaine Johnson, and this is when Keita Steves, and I heard she just passed away. Oh, and I never had a chance to meet her. I talked to her on the phone many times, and seemed like a very wonderful, colorful person. Because I asked her if I could use a story of the time she got seasick on Jake Ellison's fish tug back in the 70s. So I thought, she says, well, I don't mind. I said, well, if it might be, offensive. She goes, no. It's a wonderful story, she said. I do remember it well. So.
If you've ever been seasick, you'll remember.
Yeah, it really, because I'll never forget that. Yeah, we came back in. It was probably late afternoon, and it was funny getting off the boat because 3 hours later, you're still rolling your sea legs, and I mean, even in bed that night, I had to tie the bed down. So anyway, anyone who has been out in the boat when the waves start rolling and bouncing the boat around, you may have discovered the unfortunate affliction known as seasickness. And if the lake waves don't get you, the waves of nausea surely will. I found out firsthand after many proud years of never having gotten sick on the water, and it's a whole different ball game when you're out in the fish tug rolling around in 12-foot seas with the miasma of unpleasant aromas than to be larking around along in a little cabin cruiser. I was told by one Door County fisherman that if I was going to write a book about fishing, I had better get some experience to give myself some credibility. And I was invited to go along chub fishing on a day of blinding snow and a heavy northeast blow. In a very short time, I was pretty sick of being sick. But I made it through, and I'm told that hardly anyone escapes getting seasick while chub fishing. Elaine Johnson likes to tell a story about a reporter for the Door County Advocate, a ride in a fish tug, and seasickness. It was 1976. I contacted the Today Show. The roving reporter at the time was a man by the name of Cunningham. I told him about the conflict that was going on in Michigan and Wisconsin, and that the commercial fishing was the first industry up here along with lumbering and farming. He asked if I could orchestrate something for them, and they would come up and do an interview with some of the fisheries up here. They made a date to come on up, so I got all the fishermen together, and then I called Steve Ellison and asked him if there was some way to take the Miss Judy and set nets off the island and set them so that no matter what the weather was that day, you would be in the lee of the wind. Well, sure, he said. I can do that, Elaine. Well, they came up that one day and interviewed us. I was called Sissy of the Fishery. Can you beat that? They interviewed a lot of guys. Then I said, I got it set up for the island. They're going to lift some gill nets for you. He thought, well, that was great. I said one thing. We'll go along with anything you want, but we have a local reporter here by the name of Keita Steves who writes for the Door County Advocate, who would love to go along. She's been after me, and it's just crazy to go along with you guys. He said, oh, God, we can't do that. I said, well, we sure would appreciate it. We have a local reporter who would love to write up the story. How often do we get the Today Show up here? He agreed to let her go along. So I went down that morning, and the boat came, and here comes Keita. She was dressed to kill. She had this wig and long white gloves on. Keita thought she was really, really going to impress these New Yorkers. She went down to the gangplank and got on the Miss Judy, and away they went to the island. So on Washington Island, they went all out for the evening and were catered to by some of the islanders. They smoked fish, they dried fish, they boiled fish. Every imaginable way they could serve fish, they had it, along with beer and bitters. Anybody been to Washington Island and get their bitters card? Yeah? Yeah. You can't be bitter up there, man. You drink your shot and smile and shake your head a little bit. Yeah, I think I got my first bitters card at the age of 5. So, back then, Tom Nelson had a pharmaceuticals license, so during Prohibition time, you could legally dispense it. And it was known for everything, really. If you had a stomach ache or an ache here, maybe a little thirsty, flavoring. So everybody was up there. Everybody was sick. But then they were good, and then they were sick again the next day. But anyway, so they were given beer and bitters. Then Steve said at 6 o'clock in the morning, he said, we have to meet down at the dock. I told Steve before, when you get back to the island, call me right off the bat and let me know what happened and how it went. It was a tough time waiting for that call. He finally called and said everything went well lifting. He said he had lifted on the lee side of the island. There was a swell, but we did okay. Except we had one person who wasn't doing so well. I said, what happened? Steve said, well, the first thing, there came Keita down to the boat with white pumps on, a wavy chiffon dress, and white gloves clear up to her elbows, and a great big hat on. He said, we got out north of the island, there was just a dead swell. He said, you couldn't get away from it. Keita was down there by the lifter. Steve said, Keita, you just have to move. You got to go someplace else. You're right in the way. Go up in the bow. He had put a couple of clean boards across there. He said, go up there and sit. You'll be out of the way when we're lifting. All right, she said. Keita went up and sat on the little plank that ran across the bow. They got out to the buoy and started to lift. They had probably lifted a half a box when Steve kind of caught Keita out of the corner of his eye and could see her color was changing. Oh, no. And her big hat was starting to tilt. So anyway, Steve was clearing nets and turned around and looked up in the bow and the boat, and there's Keita. She's ready to throw up. She's not going to make it. Steve said, Keita, Steves, don't you dare throw up in my boat, with a slight chuckle. He said that old wig had come around and was twisted so you could see about one half of her eye. Steve said, Keita looked at me with one eye, and then she immediately tore off the glove, and here it came. He said she vomited, filled the glove right up. There was a portal nearby, so she got the dang thing open and threw the glove out the portal. There it went, said Steve, floating by, out by the lifter door, and I could see the white glove sailing on by. Steve said, well, we continued to lift, and we got out on the last box. I looked back at her, and she was another shade of green, and a little white around the eyes. He said that wig had almost covered her entire face. So just part of one eye was now showing. It took 3 guys to get her off the boat that day. I know how she feels. So this is out of a chapter called Humor on the High Seas, which there's a lot of humorous stories. And there was one story, I think it's here, Jake Ellison's uncle. And it's funny what they find when they pull up nets, too. A lot of things. Let's see, I think. This next story involved the Jackson Harbor fisherman and his affliction with seasickness. We'll get off this subject pretty quick here. Many people, and yes, even some of the toughest fishermen are prone to seasickness. Some guys eventually overcame the chronic problem, while others just had to roll with it. Jake Ellison told the story about his uncle Bert Hanna Cooper, who had a bout with seasickness one day and lost something more than his lunch. My Uncle Bert, Hannah Cooper, fished with my dad in the 1930s. Bert didn't stand the weather too well, and of course, that little boat, I think it was the worst rolling boat, named the Chem Jacob, on the island. It rolled like a basket in any little sea. Well, she was doing her normal thing, rolling in the sea, and Bert got sick. And he had false teeth. Well, he got sick, and everything went over the side, including his teeth. So, of course, he went to the dentist and bought a new set of false teeth. A couple of months later, didn't they get those darn teeth in the nets? I said, there's a store you can sink your teeth into, huh? Yeah. But as I mentioned before, there was always some controversy and things happen out on the lake with the DNR, the wardens. This next story is about, there was a game warden back in the day, Don Ewers. I think everybody who fished then and even maybe heard some stories, he was good at his job. I mean, he did it very well, and in a way, there's some fishermen that actually, they had a rapport with him. Others wanted to dispose of him. But this is a story, and this was told to me by Jake. When I have these story sessions, I call them roundtable sessions. This one on Washington Island was probably my favorite. We had 12 old fishermen up there, in one of the old net sheds on Nelson's dock, and so we had coffee and beer and smoked fish, and everybody showed up around 7 o'clock. I had my tape recorders and my videotape going, and Walt Jurgensen, Jake Ellefson, Kenny Coyne, Harold Greenfeld, to name a few, my Uncle Dickie Bjornson. So we started out casually just talking, and then I asked a few questions. I kind of set it up, and I think we went till 10:30, 11 o'clock that night. Just stories kept flowing, as did the beer and coffee. And it was amazing. I learned so much, and I did that in Algoma and with some of the fishermen around here, get everybody together. And I'd like to do that again. Unfortunately, most of the people are not here, and they're starting to leave this wonderful earth. But anyway, the next story is about two Washington Island fishermen who were fishing east of Washington Island and were almost confronted by the Conservation Commission wardens. With a boat full of chubs, some were undersized. They didn't want anything to do with that patrol boat, the Barney Divine. It was the name of the boat, captained by Don Ewers, and possibly being boarded. So you did everything you could to try to outrun that thing. So they decided to hightail it back to Jackson Harbor. Jake Ellison told the story in his eloquent way. He said in the late 1940s, possibly early 1950s, Ben Johnson and Fritz Bjornson were fishing out by the shoals for chubs. And this is off of the northeast end of Washington Island. At the time, the chubs were small, so you could hardly catch anything with a legal mesh size, which at that time changed to 2.5 inches in 1938. Most fishermen were using 2 3/8 inch mesh standard measure. So of course, the guys cut the mesh size down and you could get good fishing. Well, the Conservation Commission was very alarmed about that. It really didn't make a lot of difference because the market controlled the whole thing anyway. But they thought that they really had to put the kibosh on that. So anyway, Ben and Fritz had a small gang, short gang of these small mesh gill nets. They were lifting outside the shoal. They got done lifting, and they were on their way home, and there's the Conservation Commissioner's patrol boat, the Barney Divine, coming. Now, Conservation Warden Donald Ewers was a pretty sticky guy, and any of those small mesh nets, he was going to make us suffer. So, of course, Ben and Fritz headed for the cut outside of Jackson Harbor. And between Jackson Harbor, Carlin's Point, and Rock Island, there's a natural reef. So in the 30s, the Corps of Engineers cut a channel in there. Everybody called it the cut. Now it's filled in. With the lake levels, you can walk right to Rock Island. So they've got heading for the cut, and the Barney Divine is right on their heels, sucking their wake. Now, of course, once you get inside the cut, there's another little reef in front of you towards Rock Island Bluff. Normally, You get inside the cut and you horseshoe around it. But Ben knew that if he eased off the throttle and threw the clutch off, the stern would come up probably about 1.5 feet, and he'd float right across that reef. But now, the Barney Divine, being a deeper draft boat, probably 1 foot or so deeper than the Osprey, she wasn't going to float across that reef. So Ben kept the power on full speed right until he got the bow to the reef, checked down, took the clutch off, and floated. She had enough headway to slide right across that reef. The Barney Divine and her skipper, however, were not so privy to that and hit the reef, scraping and grinding to a halt. And there they sat. Consequently, it took them 4 hours to get out of there. By that time, the Osprey is back in Jackson Harbor, and Ben and Fritz got their fish packed and their nets all put away. So that, I said that was a pretty good story. They call that one hot pursuit. So does anybody have any questions? I'll continue. Let's see. Well, we can go dangers of the trade. I think I got some. Caught in a northeaster. This is actually, Elvin Gabby Anderson told me this. I did a phone interview with him. I couldn't go down to meet him in Milwaukee, but we talked on the phone for a couple hours. But he told me this story. Him and his brother were out. Back in the 30s, a lot of the Door County fishermen fished up near Cornucopia and fished in Lake Superior. And one particular place that a lot of them went to was, it's escaping me right now, Cornucopia, Port Wing. And there was Voight's fished there for a number of years, Johnson's, Anderson's. So Elvin said he was up there at least for 12 years, but it goes, preface it, commercial fisherman Elvin Anderson could talk for hours about his experiences and encounters on the Great Lakes. He has seen just about everything and every condition imaginable in his 54 years of commercial fishing. In his younger days, there was not much that would keep him from going out to get a lift. His peers coined him Geronimo because of his brazen and unflappable demeanor. When it came to fishing, he was adamant on getting a lift on those nets, no matter what Mother Nature threw at him. However, there was one experience that still wakes him out of a sound sleep and is a reminder that he's lucky to still be alive to fish another day. The year was 1951. He and his brother Floyd were fishing lake trout in Lake Superior. He goes on to say, I was talking to my brother Floyd some time ago, and we got talking about the time we were both put to the test of endurance and seamanship. It was 52 years ago in 1951. My brother and I were caught in a heavy northeaster while we were fishing out of Port Wing, Wisconsin, and up in Lake Superior. We had the boat, the RVH at the time. We had a Caterpillar diesel engine in her. It was around the time of the vernal equinox. I think it was the days of March 19th, 20th, 21st, somewhere around there. At that time, we were gone for a week fishing 40 miles out from Port Wing. We left Two Harbors, Minnesota in the spring of the year. We wintered in Two Harbors because we could get out there earlier than in Port Wing. In Port Wing, you could be stuck there half of the spring. We would go out for 4 or 5 days, and then come back. That was an awful thing, Back then, we had no radios, no depth recorders, nothing. We had an old window weight for a sounding lead and a clock and a compass. We were out there 3 days lifting probably 100 boxes of nets. We had 100 boxes of nets, and we'd lift and set around near the Apostle Islands. And we'd lay, if we couldn't get in by the islands, well, I'd never do it again. At first, if we couldn't get in by the islands, we would just shut the engine off out in the middle of the lake and lay there overnight. Now, that can prove to be dangerous because, as we all know what happened to the Lindee. It wasn't during the night, but they were down working, cleaning, and sad, but they were struck by the barge, and terrible. But he said, I'd never do it again. At first, if we couldn't get in by islands, we'd just shut the engine off out in the middle of the lake and lay there overnight. Then wake up and start lifting at daylight. The next morning, otherwise, if we could get in between the islands, most of the time we could get in between Rock and South Twin Islands. Well, shit, man. The night before, it was getting late, and Everett Johnson came by. He was just fishing way east of us in the Old Margaret. He came by us on his way back to Port Wing. The ice had cleared out there. He stopped by us, and we were just about done lifting, ready to set back, you know. It was just getting dark, late in the afternoon. I mean, it was such a beautiful day. The sun was shining. It was warm. The lake was glass, just shiny. I remember I took a hold of the buoy. I had all cotton or sisal buoy line, no synthetic in those years. There was a lot of times I'd just run the buoy line on top of the roof to dry. We sat back and told Everett that we had one more day of lifting and then we'd be back. He asked if everything was all right. We said, yeah, sure, it's fine. We're fine. We pulled in behind the islands that night. It was beautiful, but during the night, she started to blow out of the northeast, and holy Christ, did she blow. I mean, we tied by the rocky dock there at Rock Island. We were sleeping. We had hammocks at first in the boat, but that didn't work too well. Especially when it got choppy, you'd roll right out of the darn things. Then we got a rollaway bed. We put it in there, you know, that we could fold up. Anyway, during the night, that dirty son of a... Yeah, start to blow. Middle of the night to early morning, and what are we going to do? The boat was pounding up against the dock. We tried everything, and then it got to be daylight, and holy Christ, then it really whistled through out of the northeast. There's a lot of expletives in here. Somebody want to do a sound effect for the... So we tried to untie the boat and get away from the dock. Well, that didn't work. Then we thought, well, maybe if we run across in between the islands over to South Twin, there was a dock over there too. Maybe we could get a little more lee. We ran over there first, and it was getting pretty late in the afternoon, and we decided we got to do something. We can't lie here anymore. So in between Rock Island and South Twin is only a 5 or 10 minute run. Well, we seen that it wasn't gonna work, and that we thought we have to get out of here. By that time, it was really starting to blow and the seas were building. Even in there, actually, there was a reef, shallow water outside of North Twin Island and one at the entrance. We knew how to get in there. Usually their shallow water will break the seas, but it really didn't work, and they just kept screaming down through there. It was unbelievable. So then we decided we have to try to scoot down between the islands farther and around to get out of some of this. We went down through the little narrow passage. We'd never really been there before. We didn't know if there was enough water, deep water, or not to get through. We whirled around down through there. Then we were thinking, oh Christ, if a big heavy ice field would come down and get a hold of us, it would have dragged us right out. We would have had so much. We just had so much on our minds. And the big thing was survival. We pulled right behind the island, right south of Twin Island, and there was deep water right up to the beach. You could probably touch the beach and still had 15 to 20 fathom of water. We went up as far as we could and dropped our anchor. It must have been such a damn steep bank, and of course with the sea, there was such a tremendous undertow all the time that our anchor wouldn't hold. Then by 8 p.m. that night, the dirty sucker started to snow. You couldn't see the water, I tell you, and blow. We never slept for 72 hours. We shut the engine off. We didn't shut the engine off or anything. My brother and I never said one word to each other. We knew what we had to do. We didn't have to talk. Most of the time, we had to keep the sounding lead out of the portal to keep sounding the water for depth. We knew the anchor wasn't holding when each time I'd drop the sounding lead and we were getting in deeper water. We pulled up the anchor and hoped we were heading for the island. We couldn't see anything. Then during the middle of the night, she kept snowing. The water was so damn cold, and gol darn it, this wet, heavy snow, little did we know, we didn't even know it until the next morning when it started to lighten up. And hell, it was still snowing like a bitch. Looked out the portal, and in Christ, I could see the water. I said, what the hell is going on here? The heavy snow formed around the hull of the boat and kept dragging us down, pulling us under. You could not believe it. We thought we were goners. And We had side doors in the stern of the RVH on each side, but we had to be careful to get the ice off from the hull. We had to work together a little on each side at the same time. If we knocked her all off on one side, she would have rolled right over, so we had to really be careful of what we did there. I mean, another full hour, we would have went right under without knowing it. I've seen so much, well, shit, you could not believe. That wet, heavy snow and slush formed so thick on each side of the hull, and I mean, holy, it kept sucking us down. We were gone a whole week at the time, and nobody knew where we were. It was the third day when the northeaster hit. We couldn't move, and nobody knew where we were. We had plenty of coal for the stove and plenty of fish to eat, along with potatoes and onions. Yeah, that's where the fish boil started. But we weren't thinking about eating. All we were trying to do was survive. During that northeaster, while we were out there, Norman Johnson was at Jardine's Tavern, west of Port Wing. He was out by the tavern that night. He walked the floor pacing all night, kept saying, you'll never see those guys again. Those boys aren't coming back. There ain't no way that anybody could survive that storm. Nobody. Then we finally come by. Corny must have seen us come by. When we hit Port Wing, I think practically all of Douglas County was on the pier. They thought they were seeing a ghost ship come in. I tell you, that was a hair-raising experience. Every time I see my brother, we talk about that day. And when he was telling me a story, he was getting choked up. And talking to some of the fishermen, I remember it was Orville Orsted. I mean, they had some harrowing experiences out here too. I mean, life and death situations. And when the boat starts icing up in conditions, in the spring or fall or winter, I mean, you can get tons and tons of ice on the boat, and you can be actually encased in that boat. And there's a swell. That thing starts. The fishermen say, it's bad because when she takes a roll and then it hesitates and doesn't really come back. And I got some stories. There's a lot of stories of icing up in here. But another story I like is another one by Elvin Anderson. One of these they call them the three sisters or rogue waves that can happen. I remember Jay Verley telling me a story. You guys got slammed by one out here several years ago. Yeah, and it really can knock the boat sometimes out of commission. But this happened several years ago. Oh, you know what? This is going to go back years and years ago. This was. How many of you know the name of Dobner, Lawrence Dobner? There you go. I have some wonderful stories of him, and he fished for, at the time, it was Lawrence Boyd. So he said, over the span of 50 years, he fished with many fishermen in many boats. Dobner, you could say, was as seasoned as his hands from the many years of sun, wind, and water. After several years fishing with Lawrence Boyd, he fished with Lawrence's brother Stanley and told of a time when they went out to get a lift on some nets out past Pilot Island, south of Death's Door. And it's titled The Day the Combers Came In, and this was from Leonard Peterson's book, actually. I remember reading and asked if I could use the story, and it was just a fantastic story. It says, Willie Johnson and Stanley Voigt just had a brand new boat at the time, the Roamer. They also had the Hope. We were going out, it was a southeast wind. Stanley, Harry Carlson Sr., and I were on the Roamer. Willie, Bernie Wentworth, and someone else were on the Hope. He goes, I don't remember. We headed out in the morning on the lake past Pilot Island. The southeast wind was picking up. We met the island boats coming back. It was too rough for the Johnny Bull, the JW, and the Richter. The old-timers from the island, Johnny Cornell had the JW, which was the biggest boat around, and even he was heading back. We kept it going. Willie didn't turn, and Stanley wouldn't turn. Neither of them would bow down to being chicken. That was a big thing, if you can go out and get a lift on some other fishermen. Marvin Weberg was always good for that. Johnny Cornell had so we had to go out about 1.5 miles out in the lake past Washington Island to lift some chub nets. We tried 5 times to grab the buoy. We would go up and the buoy would go down. I finally grabbed a hold of the buoy and we managed to lift the nets. Then we started to head for home. There were some big combers out there. There were always 3 big ones that would come, and there would be calm for a ways, and you could watch them. Willie would put the bow up into them and ride them slow. Stanley would put the stern to them and ride down with them. We were so tossed about that we couldn't possibly dress any fish, as we always did on our return trips. I arranged the fish boxes so I could have a comfortable, safe place to sleep. I was half asleep when I heard a loud kabang. It knocked me out from about those boxes, and I flew down below the deck to the stove, there by the engine. I was in cold water, and I couldn't catch my breath. I looked out, and I could see the water running out of the boat into the lake. It was just level with the lake. I looked and saw Stanley and Harry lying on the floor in the front. They were knocked out of the pilot house. I saw that the nets were near the eccentrics of the engine, and I didn't want them to tangle up and have the engine stop. It was an old 3-cylinder Collenberg engine, and it's a good thing we had that. So I got the nets out of there first. Stanley came to and climbed back up into the pilot house. We were then lying like this. He illustrated it would look like about a 30-degree angle tilt. Stanley put the boat up into the wind slowly, but the motor started to miss. The breathers were taking in water, and we couldn't have that. So I started the blow torches, which we used for starting to heat the breathers. The method worked okay. Stanley, with great difficulty, did his best to keep the boat going straight because we were leaning so much. Harry came back, and then we started to bail. We stood below it, and I stood on the deck. We had 2 pumps pumping. We handed the 5-gallon pails up. He handed the 5-gallon pails up to me on the deck, and I would dump them. We did this for 45 minutes before we could make any time. All the ballast down below, the rocks and the chain broke loose, causing the boat to list the way it did. We finally got underway, but the others at the dock became concerned, so Willie started coming out to see if they could find us because we were so late. We were in the area of Pilot Island when they met us coming slowly, and they followed us back into Gills Rock. The next day we took out the floorboards in the bottom of the boat, put all the ballast back in place, and replaced most of the bracing. It was a job to get it all back in order. You see, Stanley kept in the trough of the sea, and the wave would come, and he would turn the stern into it and ride it down. Well, this time he didn't turn fast enough, and the comber hit us. It knocked the 2 doors in on one side of his brand new boat, and even knocked out the doors on the other side. Splinters from the doors whirled around with such a force that they stuck in the oak wood on the other side of the boat. We were lucky we didn't get killed. Things happen out there. And there was one story of, if I can find it, I think it's...
Trygvie, I just wanted to ask you, you intrigued me when you put your flash drive in the computer, because I saw a big title page that said Bayless Harbor on it.
Oh,
When you did that?
sure.
And do you think that you'll have time to show anything specific to our little burg here?
I think we can. Maybe I'll read one more story and we
Okay,
have
that
time.
sounds great. Thanks.
It is getting late, isn't it?
Time flies when you're having fun.
The
And
sort,
when
yeah.
you're having fish.
Let's see if I can find Dead Swell. It's called A Small Boat, a Big Sea, and a Bottle of Brandy. He said, this is Alvin Anderson talking, and it wasn't that bad of a day to begin with. If I remember right, in my younger days, I went out no matter what. It didn't make any difference if I thought it was dead calm or if it was blowing 50. It never bothered me. But that day, something happened. Some freak sea hit us on the way home. It came up fast out of the south, and one big sea hit us and cleaned the doors right off her, busted them right off the hinges, busted everything. She took so much water that she was right down to the rail in the water after it hit. The old Collenberg bilge pump clogged up and wasn't pumping. I couldn't believe it. The stern doors were gone, busted in. The port stern door came in immediately when we got hit by that south sea. And then she hit. The Aloha leaned so far over that the other door on the starboard side busted. They were both gone. The pilot house on the boat was in the stern. We had just stepped off the dock and got down and started to dress fish. We just got down there. Roy Nelson was with Leif Weberg and me that day. We all just got down below the stern deck when all of a sudden she hit, and I didn't see anything but sky and green water. I headed towards the front because everything was in such disarray. It was unbelievable. We had 2,700 pounds of chubs on board that day, and they were all over the place. I got up into the pilot house by the wheel, and everything was out. The radar, radio, everything was all wet and washed out. The bilge pump was out. We had the sump pump working, but we didn't have any side gas-powered pump to pump the water out. So somehow Lee, I don't know how he did it, I'll never know, he got a hold of a pipe wrench and crawled down in the bilge back behind the gear of the Collenberg with the shaft turning. He was all submerged in that cold water. He got that wrench on the plug and took the drain plug out of the seacock, pulled the seacock off, and got a little piece of screen. He stayed down in the ice cold water for hours and held that screen over the hole so we could start pumping the bilge water out of the engine, or with the engine. He said, part of the rules of the road when you get in a situation like that, caught in a big sea, you always have your bow into the seas. But every time we hit a big sea, with those doors gone, the Aloha was so low in the water that every time she went up on a sea, the water would come screaming in through the opening. We were losing more every second. I hollered to Roy and Lee, we're going to lose her, guys. We're going to lose her this way. I said, we got one chance, and that's to get her turned around and go with it. It was completely against the rules of navigation. We were heading due north. Actually, we were just north of Port Washington. I waited for 3 big ones, the 3 big seas, and then gunned her, hoping it was going to work. I just kept heading with the sea. The Aloha had a fantail stern on her, you see, and when the seas came by, they just blew away from the stern and washed by us. No water came in the side doors either, and I had to watch real close by the wheel, that it didn't swing towards me. Lee must have been down in the bilge for 2.5 hours or 3 hours. I don't know how the hell he did it. I have no idea. After we got it pumped out, we got the boat turned around and headed back for Milwaukee. Funny thing, he said we had a little bottle of brandy that we got from a fish dealer in Chicago, wrapped in a Christmas box. Well, we had it lying on one of those shelves right across the wheel near me in the pilot house. After we got everything situated, I don't know when this happened, haven't got a clue, but when we got into the harbor, Roy and Lee were getting things cleaned up. It was such a mess in there that you wouldn't believe it. Anyway, I looked up to see what was going on up in the forward station. Here they had the bottle of brandy on top of the rooster tail. On top of the lifter wasn't even a third left in the bottle. And it was a big bottle. He said, I don't know when they came and got it. I didn't ask any questions either. So there, I think I'll leave it here, and if we can go through some slides, would that be fine?
Okay, that would be great. I'm not sure I know how to get that, to get your slides.
Well, hopefully we got the, I got my clicker there. You can use that.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions, comments? Anybody have a story to share with me? We don't have time.
What was the connection always with the Washington Island fishermen in Kenosha?
Yeah, the McDonald's, there was quite a few fishermen that left Washington Island in the 50s to fish in the lower Kenosha, Racine, better fishing. The lake trout were more abundant. They didn't have to deal with the ice so much as they did in Washington Island with the harbors. Because, they'd still try to fish. A lot of the boats up there, they would tie up out by the cut. They would actually tie their boats right to the ice or tie them together, and then they could get out. But, that was precarious because, you get wind shifting and those boats they can get untethered and drift out. There's many times where they have to go fish their boats, But they had to deal more with the ice up there. And a lot of fishermen just said, I'll come back in the spring. And some of the families, the Chambers, McDonald's ended up staying there and doing very well. So.
My hometown was Waukegan, Illinois.
Waukegan's another place. Yeah, they're.
I think it's a
Oh, sure, the shanties, yeah.
It's like
And
some energy saving mode.
Nathan's a very substantial fishery there.
It
Waukegan. Racine, Kenosha, Milwaukee, Sheboygan. You know, I got stories from each little hamlet in this book, and you know, and I have plenty of books back there. You know, if you'd be interested, I'd sure appreciate it.
Does the library have a set of those?
I do believe they do. Yes, I did give them to the library several years ago. So they're wonderful reads. The first, I love them both. I mean, I'm not really biased towards any of them. The second book is more of the stories, which I've been reading. The first book is pretty much the whole history of commercial fishing, the evolution of the boats, the engines, the people, the history of each little hamlet of Door County and how, you know, it got its start, or the genesis of each little town. So that book was probably the most daunting. I mean, the history, and it was, but I loved every minute, labor of love. So I got a story in here in 1958 when they had that. That's when the Bradley went down, and there was the King. There was a couple of fishermen out of here fishing, and there was some 30, 40-foot seas in these little boats. So in the dark of night.
Do you remember, I mean, I'm sure with all your interviews and stuff, because of Wenigers and Dickies and Jay and everything, what was it? It seems to be in my memory, like was it the late 50s, or I think it was like maybe in the 1950s, where the 3 fishermen drowned right off here, off the...
Oh, I have that story. Yeah, that was.
You have that story
Yeah,
in one of the
that
books?
was in early 60s, I think.
Maybe that was it, huh?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I got the story in here of what happened, and it was just right out in the harbor here. And oh, you were. Yeah, didn't he get stuck in the? Yeah, yeah.
Bib overhauled dock, wire frame glasses. The bib overhaul was ready to pop, and so were the glasses.
Really? Because they fished him. He wasn't in that deep of water.
No, it wasn't in that deep.
They went,
The boat just ended up.
built planks on the back of the
Yeah.
boat to get more fish, but they were running good. Anderson, Sister Bay, was running the boat with Harry, and he told Harry to run it up on the shore, and he's got rocks, but it's 40 feet deep, just like that.
Oh, okay.
Last minute, Harry cut the throttle back to 7.
She went stern from the stern.
Right by the wheel.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
In his service, all the Navy, all
Yeah.
life, couldn't swim.
No, a lot of the fishermen couldn't swim. You know, and I'm amazed that there weren't more fatalities. I mean, they had pretty sound boats, most of those gill net boats. But you know, it's funny with Winnegar's. I mean, they took those pond net boats open. I mean, they'd travel 50 miles with those things. You know, they set up in. They did a lot of fishing around here, North Bay, but they also fished off of Death's Door, and then sometimes the Manitou Islands, Whaleback Shoals. I think they had. Could you tell us what you want to do on there? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, my knees. Well, here's a little history. I mean, everybody knows the history, really.
I think
Yeah, we
most
can
of
run
us
through
do.
those. Justice Bailey came here in 1848. They sought shelter from a storm. The schooner was owned by Alonson and Sweet, and then Justice Bailey said, "Hey, man, this place has got a lot of potential. Logging, lime from the bluffs." There was a lighthouse built here in 1851. It lasted about 1868, the old birdcage lighthouse, and then they built the range lights. I think it was 1868. Became the first county seat in Door County under the name Gibraltar. In 1857, county seat status was given to Sturgeon Bay. Gibraltar officially became the township north of Sebastopol. 1858, Bailey's Harbor officially became township. And then everything happened. The Swedes and the Norwegians and the Poles and Germans. Who am I forgetting? English? Irish? French? Frogtown? Yeah. Yeah, American Indians, Native Americans. Moses Kilgore, popular name here. He was the one who really made this town prosper. He was instrumental in building up the town. And then after 1870, it just really all happened. There's kind of a map. I wish you could see the main piers. They had Woltman Pier, Higgins Pier, which became the John Anclam Pier. First fisheries, here's just some names you guys will probably recognize. They're all in my book, so more history of them, but Frank and Bill Ennis, Adam Hendricks, Alfred Olander, John Anklam, Alfred Anklam, George Anklam, Bill Andrig, Vernon Miller, Ole is a miner, Meener, Oscar Peterson, Minor Dagnew, Charlie Heald, among others. There's quite a few more. And Cliff Winiger, I mean, he came here maybe late 20s even and saw the potential. And really, the inception by 1930, he built up the docks and the pier. And I don't know, there was a story, I don't know if Pat told me that, but he actually won the property from Jack Stoneman in a poker game.
It's a good story.
I don't know if that's true or
It's a
not.
good story.
But it sounded good.
The 100 men, were they all out of Bailey's country?
Not necessarily. Some were from Algoma and the Northern Door. So he employed, at one time, yeah, there was probably 100 men.
Well,
He had two
he was
crews.
from Algoma.
Yeah, he was.
Cliff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and he never did really live up here. I mean, he would, I heard he would drive every day. I mean, they had their summer home, but he still liked to be home at night. He fished seasonally, March to December. He had a number of crews. I mean, he had a gill net crew. He had 4 gill net boats. There was the Beaver, Bear. I'm drawing a blank now. Was it the CW? CG or the CG? I would get some good pictures. Here's a Algoma fishing fleet. This is around the turn of the 20th century. These were the old Mackinac boats that were housed over. There's one of Cliff's, the Clifford W. or Cliff's father, I think, had that. And there he is. His father died when he was 12, and he had to take care of the family, and he did what he knew best. He fished. Again, at a young age, there's one of the first fish tugs on an old Mackinac boat, or the hull, which they housed over. A lot of the fishing boats back then had the forward house. Then later on, over the years, they had a midship pilot house, and then later. And here we go. Here's a looking west across the harbor. He had a series of tracks. I mean, he was very ingenious. I mean, he came up with so many innovative ideas, concepts. One of his vehicles, they call them flat tops. You build a little flatbed or platform around where you could haul net boxes. So then, yeah, they'd run these the nets, and fish along the tracks and the boats. You can see those are the pond net boats. Here it is.
That saved a lot of wear and tear on his crews, didn't it? When you could use those little rail lines to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he paid everyone very well. He paid them in cash at the end of the week. Nobody ever complained working for him. He was a very, very good, very honest man. This is the Cub shed. They did a lot of the mending of nets in there. Here's a view. This would be looking south. This was probably where the condos are now. Near this vantage point, and then, geez, my memory's going now. Where would the Winiger dock, the Hickeys were just north of that, right?
Right.
Or was it part of the Winiger property?
The yacht club dock was Cliff's dock.
Okay, that's right, yeah.
Where the Hickeys are and all that was out there.
Anklam's, yeah, Alfred, thank you. And here's bringing in one of the pond net boats. They'd have a winch on that vehicle there, and they'd pull them right up. At the end of the
Is
day.
that one of those cars that they converted to?
To the flat top?
Yeah.
With the flatbed on it, yeah. I think I got a picture. Here's one of the, somebody recognize the boat? Is that the bow or the can? He had unusual names, the Rastus, some of his pond net boats. I think there's 5. He had 5 pond net boats. Here's coming up to a pond net. We set out here, very effective way of harvesting fish. It's not detrimental to the fish like a gill net would be. And this is probably in 30 feet of water. They'd have a series of, this would be the pot portion, but then there was the heart where the fish would follow this. You almost could, I wish I had a pointer. Do I have a pointer in this thing? Probably not. Oops. Oh, guys, what did I do? Huh. Oh, there it is. Don't ever touch anything here. We're going to go right from current slide. All right. So anyway.
Good
Whoop.
job.
Look at that. All right, let me get to where there we go. But then there's a lead line that the fish follow. They follow into the heart portion, and they finally go through this little opening into the pot, and then they actually just pull the net up and scoop them out. You'll see it right here. I think that's, oh, anybody recognize the guy there? Is that
Looks like Pete Husby, but.
Pete Husby?
Yeah, that looks like Pete Husby.
I think that's Riney Gates with his butt showing there.
Yeah, right. You recognize him.
He's,
Remember Pete's.
well, there's Cliff. Right, and now what they're doing, right, it looks like they're probably going to be bagging the net or getting the net up or lifting the fish up from the pot. Riney Gates and Pete Husby. And there's Cliff. Now you can see they're starting to scoop the fish, the white fish out of the net or the pot.
Remember these people.
70, almost 71, 70.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Right around
He
there.
fished right up till right before he passed away.
Yeah, he just wanted to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think he made an arrangement with the yacht club that he could continue fishing until
Sure.
he couldn't anymore, or something like
I
that.
remember Pat saying that she said that I think my dad fished harder in his last 20 years of his life than he ever did. I mean, he just, he loved it. It was in his blood. He lived for it. Pond net crew. I love that picture. Their only time that they maybe take a little break, you know. I wonder what they're eating, you know. It looks like maybe a jar of peaches or something.
One of these pictures Uncle Hunt's is on, Lord.
Anybody recognize the people there?
I think one of them
Ostrom's?
is my Uncle Hunt's on that picture. I'm not sure. I'll have to look in your book. I just wanted to say something, too, with Cliff Weniger. He was really good to us kids because when we were young, we would take our bikes with our fishing poles and go out there, and he let us fish in his boats would be docked there, and we would fish out, and we'd get 3 and 4 on at a time perch. It was just a perch paradise out there.
Wow. What a great memory, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Awesome.
He was a good guy.
Hey, there's one of the old flatbeds to the left. You can see the wood platform. So there's Cliff on the far right. It looks like Orville Orsted with his bald head there above him.
Yep.
Riney Gates on the dock.
The guy facing us is my Uncle Hunt's pile.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Phil Albertson fished with him for many years. I interviewed Phil before he passed away. He was living in Algoma. That was a tough guy. He was more of a gill net fisherman. Here's the parties Cliff would throw, usually late summer. This is probably in the 40s. It looks like they got a beer on ice there, tap. Everybody's happy. Done with the day of fishing. I know they always had, well, obviously fish, but then they had venison and quite a feed, quite a party. There's the flatbed. Pat and Liz, I think. Yeah, she breaks down, called AAA. Yeah, well, this was their first promo poster that they hung in town. Yeah. Welcome to the Weniger Fishery. We have something for you. That's Phil Albertson, right? Yep. Jobs. What's in the pail? Is that livers? Or just offal? It's probably their guts. You guys ever have, anybody have whitefish livers?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with those.
Oh, they're the best.
They're good.
Yeah. Haven't had them in years. worst thing we had to do was, I remember as a kid, every morning, cod liver oil. Mom would ram a big tablespoon down our throat. We'd be burping that up all day. I got off subject. Sorry about that. And now we got the Hickey Brothers fishery. That was one of those windy days. I was up there. It wasn't the day I went out, but there's an older picture. Dennis and is that his? Who's in the back there? Okay. Okay, sure. It's a nice whitefish. There we go. There's harvesting the whitefish. One day I went out with him. I think there was 3,000, 4,000 pounds. I mean, I was totally enthralled. I mean, it was just, the water was just boiling, and they just kept scooping and scooping. It was quite amazing.
How do they mount those poles in the lake, or do they float?
They have guy lines down with anchors, and I do believe that they keep the anchors there all year round, and they know where they are. They have a point for them, and they go down and grapple them, and then they set the stakes up. And I think it takes several days to set one up. Is that right, Jay? About
Yeah, you can set the sticks in one day and then
twine on the next. There's it coming in. Day out in the.
water, you see the floats. How far down are the nets for the floats?
They're right below the surface, really. If it's a trap net or a pond net, they're correct. The gill nets are, yeah, but a pond net and trap net are near the surface. I might have, if I had more time, I could take you through the whole concept of the nets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a nice day. You can see it's not too rough. So I was enjoying myself taking pictures. That one previous was, that was a rough day. We went out, I think they broke the steering chain on the Southwester, and we were heading out to see if they needed assistance. So I got a great shot of the Southwester. Let's see if I can go back once. It's one of my favorite photos. There it is. She was dipping down below a swell. I don't know how, I remember being on the open deck, I think we're on the Norska or something, and I was rolling around in that, and my camera was banging around. I barely got the shot off, but. So, there we go. And this is heading out in the heavy sea. There's Dennis and Jeff. This is at the lifter, at the front of the boat. And the nets come in, and the lifter on the drum there. Do you recognize that cat? Never smiles. I never got him to smile on one of these. There we go. Here's bringing in the gill net. There we go. Here comes the fish. And setting back. And those setting back, the boat's going on a pretty good clip, and those nets are just flying out of the stern. Jeff was telling me you never want to wear any type of watch or anything that it could grab, because people have been pulled overboard if you get caught, it gets snagged on you.
Well, he lost fingers, didn't he, on
Yes.
some sort of maneuver there?
You can see, I mean, everything's flying so fast. On this, you can see everything's kind of a blur. Is that when you went overboard, Jay? Was that you got pulled out? No. No, I'm just kidding. And dressing the fish sometimes on the way back, you get a little time. Homeward bound, and sometimes you mend a net. Sometimes you take a little nap. And then back at the mission controller at the sheds. Processing the harvest. Ah, the roe eggs. They have a wonderful market for that in Sweden and is it Japan and some of the European markets. The whitefish roe and chub roe. Caviar, man.
Mm-hmm.
There's the skipper, the leaf. I think these next ones are just, actually the last of the pond net fishermen. The Hickey brothers, there isn't anybody that I know of around Lake Michigan that fishes pond nets anymore. It's a dying art. There's harvesting, you scooping out the whitefish.
Being ignorant, what's a pound net?
Pond net is short for impoundment gear. It's a way of entrapping the fish and contain them in an area in the net. I might have a diagram showing it. Yeah, and I have it in my book. In my first book, there's several chapters that are dedicated. And this is Algoma Fisheries. So I think we'll leave it, stop it there, maybe some other
Okay.
time.
Sounds
Because
good.
we're kind of getting,
Because we don't want to fulfill your prophecy of being here quite till midnight. Even though
well, I got to
it's
drive back to
been
Green
pretty
Bay and
fabulous.
get my kids to bed too, so,
Yeah.
in a while.
It's been pretty fabulous. As you're telling these stories and then looking especially at Cliff Winiger's history, it just strikes me. The first thing I was thinking is that you could collect the stories that people survived those things. It's amazing that they did. I mean, just incredible. And also, Cliff Winiger, I think he started his fishery here in 1931, I think.
31?
I think so.
I wasn't,
Well, it's the early 30s, let's say. But whether it was 31, 32, or whatever, that was in the Depression. I mean, that was really into the Depression. And he was able to make a success out of that, and as you say, eventually employ all these people. I mean, it was an incredible thing that they were able to do. But Lord knows they worked for it. There is no question about that. So, Trig, I can't thank you enough for spending the evening with us.
I'll be here for